NOLALit for those of you who have not joined us before. And then Megan, you can maybe talk for a minute about one book and we can dive in. So Becca and I and Fran is here. I think maybe that's it for our regular crew. We meet usually at the columns once a month and read books with either by New Orleans authors or with some kind of New Orleans connection, New Orleans theme. And we're just fun little book club. We're part of the Creativity Collective. That's a nonprofit that's just trying to support creativity and networking of artists and people who appreciate cultural activities, including literature. So I don't know, Becca, what else am I supposed to tell them?
We've been around a couple years, so we varied in size greatly. Sometimes a lot of members, sometimes a few. So we're always welcome new members.
Yeah. Okay. And Megan, I guess most people probably know about One Book, but just tell us anyway.
Sure. So One Book, One New Orleans is an organization focused on community literacy and community reading. So we pick one book every year, and we encourage everyone in the city to read the same book at the same time, with the idea that we're going to come together as a city through a shared reading experience. But in doing that, we have to recognize that we have a 27% functional literacy rate among our adults in this city. Wow. So One Book has to do an extra layer of outreach to make sure the book is accessible every year to those who would normally be pushed outside of a community of readers. So I develop a curriculum around the book. That's what that doctorate in English is good for, right? Curriculum development. And we distribute the book and its curriculum free of charge to adult education programs, ESL programs, high-set programs, prison education programs, and juvenile detention education programs in 7 parishes in Louisiana. And then we have a series of free family-friendly events inspired by the book to sort of bring everyone from all walks of life together. And our wonderful, wonderful board member, who's also our event chair, is here. That's Liz Granite with the air traffic controller headset.
Hey folks, I was actually editing some poems to video to get ready for our video series Griot work. So I'm in work mode with my headset here. So even though we are not gathering for live events, we will have some really fantastic content coming out, including this week.
Right.
Ooh. Well, Megan, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you picked this book and what kind of reactions you've gotten to it so far? Not sure how much you've been able to get together with people, but
I mean, fortunately this year we were ambitious as all get out. So we managed to have 2 public events face to face before all this craziness started. Our keynote was packed. It had about 60 people, and it also had about 60 chairs, so that really worked out. And then our Tom Dent dialogue, which basically brought together Tom Dent scholars and people who knew him at Dillard University, had about 40 people in attendance. And people have been excited. Here's the book. Look what the publisher did, y'all. They put our logo on the cover on the new edition. It's so exciting. And that's the other thing that's been really cool this year is the publisher has been so excited and has really become a true partner in this over at UNO Press. They're just over the moon and have just been wonderful. I can literally call them and they get back to me in 2 minutes, and it's an amazing relationship. Yeah.
What was the copyright on this book? I don't see it on there. I was looking. I mean, like, is it a couple years old? Last year? How new is it?
The publication of the first edition was 2018. Okay. And then the publication of the latest edition is 2020 January.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
I didn't see it on there, and I was curious about it.
Yeah, and people have been excited because, like, I consider myself a good literary citizen of New Orleans, and I had read maybe 1 Tom Dent play before this book. I had no idea how extensive this body of work was. I don't think a lot of people knew. Kalamu Salaam in the introduction actually says this guy doesn't get his due. And I think that's been the reaction of a lot of people too. It's like, oh, I'd heard of this guy, but wow, I had no idea he was this prolific. Yeah.
Right. And way more prolific. I mean, there's a bibliography for that.
So I have to
Kate
confess, I had not.
Kate is here and she's muted. Right there.
Oh, Kate is here.
Hi, Kate. Yeah, but she's muted. Is it done?
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Yeah, check it out.
Hello.
So Kate, if you hover over yourself, you'll see a little bubbly thing up in the top right-hand corner, and it'll say unmute.
Can she hear?
I can unmute you. I think. Can I unmute you? Yeah.
Yep. Talk, Kate.
Hello, Kate.
Hi, Kate. Hold on. I don't think she hears, but she's not muted.
You know, it took me a couple of minutes before the audio started coming in.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
No.
I can hear you.
Yeah. We heard you.
So what were you saying, Elizabeth?
I'm not sure I remember. Well, I guess we should, I think I was saying, actually, I had not heard of Tom Dent, unfortunately, before I started reading this book, and then I felt like I should have heard of him, but I hadn't, and it was really interesting to get to know both him and, you know, some of his work and the way he thought about things. And then also the way the book was written, it kind of just gave a lot of the historical background of what New Orleans was like, what New York was like at the times that he was working. So that was kind of interesting as well. You know, I kind of, you know, as I was sitting here like self-quarantined and not able to go anywhere, you know, when the section in the back of the book talking about New Orleans, and they start talking a lot about, you know, like Zulu and the parades and, you know, the St. Joseph Day parades and all that stuff, it was just kind of interesting to think about that this is really, you know, a major part of New Orleans culture is, of course, all of our kind of Mardi Gras traditions about people getting together that are a little bit maybe unique to New Orleans, and that there are different traditions in different neighborhoods, and that you know, some of the, like the Mardi Gras Indian tribes have their own unique traditions, and you know, throughout the whole book there was kind of this sort of a lot of thought about the difference between sort of assimilating into, I guess, what society thinks of as success versus people keeping their own kind of unique traditions of the local area where they grew up and lived, and sort of like which one is most important, or how do you balance them. So that was one of the things that I got, you know, out of this book that was kind of interesting as we sit here sort of unable, like all of our traditions are suspended at the moment. So, yeah, so it was just kind of interesting to think about that. And also because of all of the deaths that are occurring right now, you know, from primarily older people in the community, how, like, are we going to start losing some of these traditions, or losing them more rapidly than we have in the past? So I was kind of sitting here like worrying about that as I read.
Thank you. That's an interesting take on all of that. I was surprised. I had never heard of Tom Dent, and I was a little surprised because over the last several years, I would participate in some NEH teacher programs. One of them was in Alabama, Stoning the Road We Trod, and it was all about the foot soldiers and the civil rights movement in Birmingham in the, in the 50s and the 60s, prior to 1964 with the passing of the Voting Act, maybe in 64 was the 65. And then just a few years ago, I was at Tulane and we studied music and the civil rights movement in New Orleans. And I'm pretty sure that name did not come up at all. But I guess it makes sense because what's interesting about Tom Dent, I think, is that he focused a lot, I gather, that he focused an awful lot on the post-civil rights movement, like what was going on in the late 60s and in the 70s. I found that he focused a lot on that, which is kind of a gray area. And so I thought, wow, this is a really good perspective. That's what struck me about this thing, about the book. And I think that's a good explanation of why I never heard about him very much when I was studying things about the South earlier in the 50s and the 60s. And one thing that you touched on, Elizabeth, about the festivals and light of what's going on now, and are we gonna begin to lose some of our culture? What really resonated with me is that what's happening right now in New Orleans is impacting the Black community at a greater rate than it is any other race, including the white community. And knowing that that's happening right now and reading this book this past week was, that really resonated with me. And I'm wondering, how he would, look at this today.
Was anyone else really struck by how much of this could have been written yesterday? Because that's what kept sort of blowing my mind as I was reading.
Yes, absolutely. In one sense, it felt like being in a time capsule, getting to experience it felt like I was with him, getting to experience the city. And then on the other side of the same coin, it was like, this is all very familiar. And it's like, the times have changed, and really, have they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And he goes back and he does this last piece in the early 90s, but he does a lot of his traveling right prior to that. I think maybe my timeline's a little messed up, but he wants to see what's happening in these tiny communities post-civil rights movement. He wants to see how many things have changed. And I rather gather that not too many things changed as maybe some people might have expected them to change back in the early 60s and 64 and 65. I don't think a lot of people are not, the economics haven't changed for a lot of people. The fact that they're not, politically, it hasn't changed an awful lot. Black people who have become politically active, sometimes he implies or says that many people, let themselves get bought out. And so we're not thinking maybe so much about community. So he's still very concerned. In the 90s, he was very concerned about what was happening to the Black community in the South.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, if anyone has a TV or radio on, could they turn it off? I feel like I'm hearing something.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. Mark, you were going to say something. Or Matt, sorry. You were going to say something.
Hey, everybody. So this is very meaningful to me when One New Orleans chose this book. I actually moved to New Orleans from Oakland, California in 2001, specifically to follow a mentor of mine, John O'Neill, who, along with Tom Dent, was involved in leading the Free Southern Theater. And I'd always heard of Tom Dent very reverentially, and yet had never really read any of his stuff. So it is very powerful and very timely that this is being done right now. It's very powerful for me, so thank you. One of the things that's very interesting to me, in addition to the other things that folks have said, and I might explain partially what you were talking about, Fran, is I think that I'm Jewish. Eastern European, and there is a, so identify with Woody Allen a lot of times, and there's almost like a Zelig-like quality to him, in like that he was present at so many historically important, culturally important places and collections of people. And a lot of his role, I think, was reporting on those situations. And so I don't think he necessarily got the credit as a creator as often as he should have. But I think that's a lot of it.
Well, he talks about that a little bit about, the purpose of a griot, or the life of a griot, is not to, the attention is not necessarily cast on you. You're more of maybe a repository or a keeper of the information.
Actually, within certain traditional West African caste systems, griots aren't really revered because they're considered lower, less than. It's always been interesting to me, the role of the griot or the jolly and how it varies from culture to culture. And so reading this with the title, New Orleans Griot, and knowing how he wasn't quite celebrated in his lifetime, knowing that I had never read his work until so recently, that's how I thought of him. It's like, oh, is that how we're treating our griots here? Are they the less than? Are they the lower class? Are they, are we irreverent towards them within our society? And then as we start losing them is when we go, oh, wait, we want to get that back. We want to get that information, that you have that knowledge, that you have that no one else captured the way that you did. So it was interesting that this conversation started with that, as we are losing culture leaders and in danger of losing more. To me, it just really brought the urgency back to celebrating our contemporary griots.
Well, full disclosure, I had never heard the term. I did not know how to pronounce the term. I don't think I still do. And I had to look it up. So.
Well, Liz,
A learning experience.
Yeah, Liz, can you explain that a little bit more? Because to me, what my limited knowledge in many societies, the tale teller, the keeper of the history is very revered and is very respected. And maybe that's more Native American than African, but to me, it was, what you just said was quite surprising.
What's a little bit different about the role of the griot or the jolly is that they travel. So they're considered a troubadour. So it's a little bit different in the way that they're not necessarily among their community while they're storytelling, or while they're sharing the information or singing praises or bringing joy.
More like the Roma then.
Yeah, or like the old European troubadours or minstrels.
Which were always eyed with a little bit of suspicion, I guess I would say. Exactly.
And, when we think of those people today who are constantly on the road, we think of them as transients or maybe vagabonds. So there was some of that too. It's this person who has all this information from a community, yet is not necessarily among or with that community at all times, because they're going to share that information or tell those stories elsewhere.
Who's a modern day griot?
Well, I think with the miracle of the internet, especially, everybody really has the capacity and the power to be one. Anyone from our musicians to our artists to our storytellers to bloggers to photojournalists. Technology has really, I think, opened that role so that so many more can fill.
I have a question. How much do you think not knowing Tom Dent is a factor of who the periodicals and books that he wrote for? Because I'm looking at finally looked at the bibliography, and these are still magazines that you would hard pressed to find in a library, or they're not. It seems like things from the Black press are not really easily found unless you are part of that community. And so it would be hard for anyone to find even current griots if that's the periodicals that they are writing for.
Exactly, because I think most of the things he wrote for were like the Tribune and things like that, which don't really have repositories the way the Times Pick did, correct? And even now, I feel like going to his archives, even that in terms of accessibility is difficult in a way. Because you have to go to Tulane, there's no parking. You have to figure out a place to park. You've got to go to the Amistad. You've got to, make the appointment, yada, 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 yada. So there's this idea of, accessibility and where things are housed and how that gets transmitted to the general public that also, I think, is very much going to what Marion's saying.
I wonder if HNOC has information about them.
I've talked to HNOC and they have very little actually. Most of their stuff's at Amistad. His stuff's at Amistad.
I'm wondering.
I can't help but see that Freddie Evans is here.
Hi, Freddie. You're muted.
He's muted, I think.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Sorry, Freddie, you got to say something.
Yeah, I feel so distant. I haven't been there in a month. I'm out of town.
Oh.
Yeah, so
well,
I feel distant in a couple of ways.
I'm so glad you signed in.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to see everybody, and thanks for selecting this book, Megan, and the committee. I'm sure it wasn't just you. Yeah, I'll let you guys see. I do exist.
Oh, there.
Hi, Dr. Evans. How are you?
I'm ready. I'm not a doctor. So Tom was, I think a lot of it too was his personality, that he was a person who did the work. He did not seek acclaim or the limelight, so to speak. So I think that should add to the fact that his work was published in places that were not accessible to the public, and the fact that he was an onlooker, a reporter, and not an activist, so to speak. So many times it's the people, you take either role, either the activist or the reporter, seldom do you have both. I think those are all contributing factors. Even when he attended our workshops at NOMO, Marion was a part. Marion, were you there with? Okay, I can't hear you.
I'm still muted. Okay, no, I joined NOMO right after he died because I remember y'all were mourning him and I didn't have the slightest idea who you were talking about. So, because I'm not from New Orleans either. So, no, I never met him.
But when he did attend, he would just sit there and listen, so you never knew what he was thinking about. So at that point, he was probably in the reporting mode, so to speak, and not in the activist participant type mode.
Well, I was also totally fascinated by his work as a cultural organizer and the way in which he and O'Neill, I guess, were at loggerheads, and I'm sure Kalamu fits in, or I'm guessing maybe we're more on the Tom Dent side, between these two visions of Free Southern Theater, kind of one being an alternative elite theater to grassroots neighborhood community-based theater, and just Tom's writing in this really made that debate come alive for me, having been in theater companies and around O'Neill, and so it was quite amazing for me. What's your memory of their relationship? Do you have one of that discussion? How O'Neill and those groups within Free Southern Theater would kind of talk about their different positions?
No, I'm not familiar enough to comment on that, but I have attended some of the plays that he wrote, well, the enactment of the plays. And you probably know Chakula. Chajua has produced several of his plays, and one that he does often is Ritual Murder. So this is connecting to your question about the theater. And he must have written that play, 50 years ago? At least 40, because I think he had a reunion production of it.
He did.
Most recently.
He did.
I can't remember what year that was. Was it the 40th year?
I honestly, it must be 50th.
Yeah, probably so. But you would think that he wrote it yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And someone else alluded to the current themes in his work and how contemporary his work seems, although the work is very, very old.
And that's in the book. And everybody should note that Ritual Murder is in the book.
Mm-hmm. But it was just so
Yep.
current.
I'm looking at the book right now to see if there's a year readily available on the play, and I can't find one.
Oh, here we go.
But I feel like it's like 72, 73, but I don't know
Yeah,
why.
I think in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 45th or something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Ritual Murder, yeah, page 137. But it doesn't indicate a year at this point.
Yeah, and that was actually the one piece I had read before this whole anthology.
Really?
Yes. It's in the 200 Years of New Orleans Literature anthology, edited by Nancy Dixon. So it's in that, and I'd read that anthology cover to cover. So and that was my only exposure to Tom Dent before this. But now I just want to go to the papers and spend, because apparently this is only about a third of what's actually in the collection.
I know it's
Kalamu talks about going in there and just being like, I thought it was going to be a 3-day project, and then I actually got into the archives, and oh gosh, I didn't even I, and he was my best friend, didn't realize how prolific he was.
Wow.
Yeah.
76 is
76.
here.
Thank you, Laura.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So are you saying, somebody was saying, I'm sorry, I forget who was speaking, maybe Ms. Evans, people are still performing this today
Yes.
in New Orleans?
Yes. Chakula Chajua. What's the name of his company?
That's the name of the company too.
Oh.
I think it's Chakula Chajua Theater.
Theater.
And they did it at Ashe, I think,
Mm-hmm.
Cultural Center in Central City.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was an annual thing for a while, and then he stopped doing it, and I guess he does it every few years, maybe now.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if all this craziness goes away by the end of the year, One Book's hoping to get it staged. So fingers
that'd be
crossed.
great.
Yeah.
Nice. That would be great.
Mm-hmm.
We can get New Orleans Jazz Orchestra to write some music for it like they did last year with Benjamin.
Oh God, that was amazing.
That
Yeah.
would be fantastic if they did something for Ritual Murder. That would be very meaningful. Yeah.
There would be.
You know, I guess since we're kind of on this track, can I deviate for a little second? And if you guys have like a dream Tom Dent event that you'd like to see us do, what would it be?
Okay, I just gave mine, so.
Okay.
I think that would be great to restage his plays, the familiar one and maybe one that's not so familiar.
Because it also recognizes Chakula's work in keeping Tom's legacy alive.
Mm-hmm. And theater.
Mm-hmm.
And theater. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
This might
Yeah, I mean a celebrity like stage, because I believe it's very simple to stage. It's very much like a TV kind of story.
And wouldn't it be great to get a recording to put on YouTube, like a YouTube clip or something, videotape it and have it available to a wider audience?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Taking notes.
Yes, taking all the notes. Laura, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd love to see the kind of event that the Academy of American Poets does for people, where you get the living poets to come and read a poem from the collection. So to just see amazing local poets reading those poems would be an incredible night for a night or a incredible night or an incredible Zoom.
Mhm.
Do that. We can definitely do that.
Also, I mean, just thinking.
Wolfman, Walter Washington, he spoke about him a lot. And so you gotta get Walter there, whatever you do.
Anybody know Walter? Anybody got his number?
I wish I did.
I'm gonna get him. I got him. Don't worry. I got him.
That's awesome. I pretend I know him.
Right, that's my dream. Like, that is my dream event, is just to get Walter Wolfman Washington to play something while someone else reads the words that Tom Dent wrote about Walter Wolfman Washington.
Yeah.
That's my dream. That's my pipe
Beautiful.
Yeah, but he did say that Walter should sort of sell out and stop playing the blues to achieve popular success. So it sounds like I don't think he ever took his advice.
He was concerned about Walter not getting enough press. He was very concerned about Walter, but I don't know. Maybe Walter's just really happy doing what he does, and he actually does travel. He travels internationally.
I always assumed he was. I just sort of assumed that about, musicians in general, that they're happy with the style of music that they're playing. But it was just interesting to have him say, if he were to, I mean, he didn't say exactly what kind of music he should play, but I'm assuming something a little bit more rock or a little more pop or something, that he could have more popular success than being in this sort of blues camp.
I like Walter in the blues camp, though.
Yeah, I think he's good. I don't think he needs to change anything. So,
he's getting up there, so he probably won't change it.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, pretty sure he's not planning any changes.
I was thinking Tom Dent might be happy knowing where Walter is right now.
Another idea that would be different than this good idea, a different thought was, I think there are a lot of writers, a lot of cultural figures who would love to know that Tom Dent is finally kind of being recognized beyond New Orleans. And it might be something to do, it might be interesting, particularly given quarantine, seeing if any of them would be interested in saying something, contributing to either a YouTube video or something that was, it might bring attention to the book as well.
That's a good idea.
What's really fascinating? Oh, sorry, what?
Yeah, he had strong ties to New York, in his life. I don't know if there's anyone in the New York community that would, be around still that you would feel an affiliation with him. I'd have to think. Oh, Megan's waving.
Kalamu's joining us, y'all.
Oh, hey, Kalamu.
Woo!
Hi. I want to also add to what Matt was saying, Matt. What you suggested rather is important, because many people are not alive who worked with him and who were his contemporaries. So I think if we can find someone who is alive who can give those kind of comments, that would be very significant. And we would
kind of working on that. One of my mentors from undergrad is this guy named Tony Bolden, who he mentions in the interview with Jerry Ward. Like really briefly. And Tony Bolden was a member of the Congo Square Collective when Tom Dent was still around. So we got him. He's really technology impaired, so you got to work with that, but he's willing to do something. And he's in Kansas right now. He's a professor there. So we're trying. We're really trying to get Tony Bolden involved. He's young too. I would say when he taught me in undergrad, he was maybe in his late 30s. So he's got to be in his 50s now. Yeah. So Kalamu, hello, the man himself. Kalamu, you're on mute. So if you want to talk, you've got to unmute yourself. I don't know if he can hear me.
Yeah, he did it.
All right.
There you are, right on. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You just mentioned Tony Bolden. Briefly, when we had Black Art South as an extension of Free Southern Theater under Tom. We continued the workshop, and Tony was one of the people who joined us. And Tony is in Kansas as a professor, recently contacted me about doing an article on, I am not a Christian. I am not, quote unquote, a man of faith in the traditional sense of organized religions. But I do have a patron saint, and that is Langston Hughes. Tony asked me about doing an essay on Langston Hughes, and I have agreed to do so. Tony is also the head of the Langston Hughes Society, I believe, and they're doing a publication. Tony is among many people, all who are now all across the countryside, who were directly influenced by Tom Dent. Tom is, in my opinion, the most important native-born New Orleans writer of the 20th century, period. I don't think anybody else comes close in terms of the influence that Tom had. So when a few years back, when I was offered the opportunity by Abram to put together a collection of Tom's writing, I immediately said yes. Tom was my friend, my mentor. We were very, very close. In fact, at one point, Tom would give me keys to his place when he was traveling. I would have access to his place and would, take care of things. Tom and I were very, very close. So when Abram made that offer, I immediately agreed. One of the places I went was up to Amistad, and they have a good, healthy selection of Tom's work because it was deposited there. And a number of people were responsible for that. I happened to have been in Germany, Munich, Germany, when Tom passed away. But I visited Tom. I left on a Monday. I visited him on a Sunday in the hospital. He died that Saturday, the following Saturday. And I was still in Munich, Germany when he passed away. All of which is to say, the Tom Dent Reader is exemplary in terms of looking at the work of a native-born New Orleans writer over the years. And I don't think there's any other writer whose work could be assembled like the Tom Dent book is and would be representative of their time, their place, their importance, and their influence. And I would just challenge anybody that if they think that a mistake was made in selecting, New Orleans Griot as the 2020 selection for One Book, One New Orleans, I challenge you, put up your information. I don't want to argue about it. Unless you put up your information, a book, manuscripts, or whatever have you. We'll put them side by side. And I will leave it to the people to decide, including everyone on this panel. That's it. I'm through.
So could I ask everyone to sort of maybe go around and talk about their favorite piece in the book, or like something they learned from the book that was unexpected? Anybody have a favorite?
I think reading the actual poems because it's a fair ways into the book before you get to them, and I just felt like so I hadn't read them ahead of time, and I just felt like this sense of anticipation, like where are they? I want to read them, you know, as I kind of got to know Tom without actually experiencing his work yet, because I wasn't familiar with him ahead of time. So it was really exciting to read this. And I thought actually he, and I don't know if I'm supposed to think this or not, but he reminded me a little bit of Langston Hughes. Like I felt like there was a little bit of a similarity there between the way that they both wrote. So I don't know if that's something other people think or not, but that was something that was I thought was interesting.
Why do you say that? Why do you
Well,
say Langston Hughes specifically?
I think it might be because of my limited experience
Black writers, maybe.
Well,
with
Kalamu,
other poets of that genre, but
for me, it was the way he
But-
talked about using music. Like the way that he talks about using music in poetry and plays, and the way that Langston Hughes talked about using music were very much in line. And so when he would talk about, you know, we have to use Coltrane, we have to use James Brown in our plays and our works and really bring those guys to the forefront, it reminded me so much of Langston Hughes blues poetry. So yeah, that's why it gave me Langston Hughes vibes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a couple of theories, and I'll just mention one briefly. And that is African American culture up until basically the civil rights movement was primarily focused on the ephemeral, that which existed in the moment, such as music, but not after the moment. You have, of course, recordings and what have you that are, if I could use a medical term, that are sort of an autopsy, but they're not the music. They are a recording of the music. Just like I don't think books are really talk. It's a way of recording talk, recording ideas that might be in people's head. So that when we talk about African American literature, we're talking about a literature that is based in a culture which was dominated and oppressed and exploited by the majority or the dominant society of its time period. But what one of the most incredible aspects of it is that from almost the majority of the time we're talking, going all the way back to the 1700s, everything cultural that was concrete, some would say plastic, material, was prohibited. It was against the law to even write something down, to carve a statue, to whatever you might consider material production of a culture was prohibited for a long time under all the way up to the Civil War. And then it was discriminated against all the way up until the success of the Civil Rights Movement. The response in the Black community then was to move and focus almost all cultural activity had a focus into the ephemeral, because to even be caught with a book, you were subject to death. To even carve a statue, your hands could be cut off. I'm not exaggerating this. I'm trying to put it in a cultural context that many people overlook or refuse to admit. They refuse to admit just how draconian the American society was for the majority of the existence of the American society. And the attempt was to completely wipe out the material culture of Black people. Langston Hughes was one of the first, not one of the first writers in general, but one of the first to base his work on the blues, which up until the turn of the 20th century could not be recorded because there was not a mechanism for recording it. If you look at the books and so forth and so on, when did electricity come in? When were first recordings made? You know, all of these things, the 20th century culture, material culture, we were brought up in it and we are so accustomed to it, we tend to think of culture in general in that way, without understanding for the majority of the existence of the United States, there was no opportunity to produce material culture. And that is the significance of Langston Hughes, that when he wrote based on the blues, which was the response of, quote unquote, the unlettered, the illiterate, the majority of the people. But Langston Hughes himself was a major intellectual whose beauty as an intellectual is often overlooked and shortchanged, and some people have even said that his poetry was doggerel, that it was almost, it was not quite up to the standards of being a quote unquote, a true poet. This was a man who was literate and conversant. He could write and talk in 3 languages: English, French, and Spanish. He produced work in those languages. He produced writers in those languages. And most of us are not aware of just how deep this man was, Langston Hughes. And it's just amazing, because in any other circumstance, he would be considered the major writer of the United States. And on top of all of that, he was very political. During the period of the Spanish Civil War, Langston Hughes signed up and went there as a correspondent. And while he was there, he was good friends with, of all people, Ernest Hemingway.
It was a race.
And when Langston Hughes left to return to the United States, Ernest Hemingway was still in Spain at that time. Ernest Hemingway threw him a going away party. That's how close Ernest Hemingway felt to Langston Hughes. Most of us do not have a knowledge of Langston Hughes and don't think of Langston Hughes in that way. He translated Lorca. He translated other Spanish-speaking writers. Both, and well, I'll stop. But you get the point, you understand the point. So that's why I asked the question, why Langston Hughes? Because most of us think of Langston Hughes only as a poet of sing-song rhymes and not as a great intellectual, certainly not as a world traveler, and more than that, not as one of the major editors and anthologists of the United States. That's Langston Hughes.
It'll be pretty amazing to be in a military regiment with Ernest Hemingway and Langston Hughes, huh? not your typical soldiers.
Notorious racist.
Yeah.
I love Hemingway, but
I mean,
that's rather contradictory.
Why do you say it's contradictory?
Well, wasn't he? He was a racist. I mean, many people, you know, from what I've read and
Uh-huh.
a bit about him.
Well, all of us were affected by racism at that time, and we couldn't get around it. And but do we describe him? Do we think of, like, when we think of Ernest Hemingway, is the first thing we think of is this is a man who committed suicide?
Oh, that was very contradictory now, wasn't it? Because he was every man's man. He was,
Yeah, he was supposed to be the macho man.
Exactly.
Blew his head off. Do we think of him in those terms? Do we think of him as an alcoholic?
Well, I do, but
Well,
I can
yeah.
tell a little bit about him.
but in a
I
good
read
way.
quite a bit about him.
Yeah,
I
but
would
that's
like to say
that's
that,
not.
to your point, I would like to say that, you know, I'm a white girl growing up in a small town in South Louisiana, but I've worked a lot with Black students and in Black schools in Baton Rouge for, like, you know, 20 or 30 years. And when I was at Estrema High School in the 90s into the early 2008, I was there for 13 years. Estrema High School at that point was a Black high school in Baton Rouge. And I will tell you that I knew so little about Black writers and Black artists, but that's where I learned about Langston Hughes. I was a librarian there, but the English teachers were very devoted to Langston Hughes. And I got my education, the little bit I have of Mr. Hughes, there, because he was very well treated as a writer and as an artist. And the young people at that school did not graduate there without knowing who Langston Hughes was.
And that's because Langston Hughes made it was a conscious decision. It was not just an artistic accident. He made a conscious decision on how he wanted to write. And you can go look at his literature, look at collected poems of Langston Hughes, look at his simple stories, which he wrote 3 books. There are 3 books of that. The vocabulary he uses is the vocabulary that the quote unquote common person could understand, the working class could understand. That was not because that was the only vocabulary he knew. That was a conscious choice. And I think that's what's often overlooked about Langston Hughes. You know, the very people who sometimes accuse him of writing doggerel or not being a great intellectual could not even converse with him in all the languages he spoke.
Right.
You know.
And it's so interesting when you say it like that, Kalamu, because I feel like you said pretty much the exact same thing about Tom Dent in the intro. Like, this is a man who was set up for the elite academy, and instead he chose to go and he chose to make his literature a literature of the people. And I wonder if there's a connection between Hughes and Dent in that regard as well.
I can respond to that, but I want to hear from other people. I don't want to be the one talking all the time.
Well, you asked, I think the original question was there a favorite of ours? And I have just been skimming back and forth, and what jumped out at me that I remember reading earlier was In Search of Black Indians, and that jumped out, if only just because today on Twitter there got to be this war about whether Mardi Gras Indians were a ripoff of Plains Indians, and you know, I was going to mention this chapter, but I mean, they had people who were Caribbean Americans who jumped in right away and said, "Oh no, oh no, this has nothing to do with trying to appropriate the culture of American Indians." So that just, to me, reading the history, because I'm not from New Orleans, so reading all of the stories that are historical stories are very interesting to me. All of those sections.
I was going to try and be quiet, but when you bring up the Plains Indians in Southwest, we must remember the average person, the average quote unquote American citizen, if they know the name of any one Indian, Native American, what name would that be? It would probably be Geronimo. That's the name that is most often used. But why Geronimo? Geronimo led the resistance. He was a resistance leader, and he was captured by the U.S. Army and made and paraded around the United States. But his life was in resistance. We think of Indians and we only think of the United States. Most of us have no knowledge of Central America, no knowledge of South America, and understanding that there were quote unquote Indians all up and down the hemispheres here, and that it was the resistance. That's why the Indians, quote unquote, were important. The Mardi Gras Indians responded to the resistance element. And if you study the Mardi Gras Indians in the prior to the 50s, the fighting was done amongst them with hatchets and knives. It was really a violent activity, and Mardi Gras was seen as a time to settle scores and what have you. But the point I'm making is we don't have so much of our culture is now sanitized and defanged, so we wouldn't even recognize it, and we wouldn't know it if we, went to sleep in a time machine, did a Rip Van Winkle, and woke up, in 2020, and say, is this is what y'all can think it is about? No, that's not what we were about. And there's an effort made by this society to make it seem, well, to make all of Black culture in the name of Little Black Sambo, who would be harmless, who would not be someone who would kill them. But at the same time, this is the same society that routinely and systematically slaughters Black people. Why is this?
Now, another thing that I read in the book that they brought out about the Mardi Gras Indians was the masking concept. And I believe that they said something about the masking concept. Black people would have to mask, they would have to hide. They weren't allowed to just come out and be known and be free. And I thought that actually resonated quite a bit with me, especially in light of what's happening today with the masks. I don't know. I just saw so many different connections to what I read in this book and a lot of the insight in this book. And you don't have to stretch too far to make connections today to what is written and what was selected to be in this book.
Yeah, the mask has.
In the St. Joseph's Night essay, right?
I didn't hear you.
Oh, I said, I think she's talking about that line in the St. Joseph's Night essay, which I'm trying to find right now.
Yeah, I remember reading it. I don't know where I read it.
It's on 197 in the new edition. Is it thus African culture has survived in the New World to the extent that it has masked, submerged itself in new forms that will not be destroyed by the dominant white culture? That line?
I was referring to.
Yeah.
Can't remember all of that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't go verbatim with that.
And understand that mask has at least 3 different levels. There's the mask that's used to hide. There's the mask that's used as representative of. That is, this mask represents, for instance, the Pope's clothing. When he comes out, he doesn't look like, quote unquote, the ordinary man in his robes and his tall hat and his staff and what have you. That's a mask. We don't think of it in those terms, but that's all it is. The coat and tie, the tie that most men of means are thought to they ought to wear in proper society. That is the mask also. Now, the third level, however, of the mask, the first level is to hide. The second level is, in a sense, to present someone in a certain way. But the third level, the transformation, that comes specifically from the African use of the mask, in which the mask wearer is transformed into a spirit or a God. And so you have those three levels going on when you talk about the mask. And most people only think of the mask as something that you hide behind. The Indians don't, the Mardi Gras Indians don't, they don't think of it in that way, if they consciously think about it. Thank you, Marion. Is anybody else going to speak?
Was did I understand that one of the victims who passed away in New Orleans was I can't remember his name, the gentleman who had the Mardi Gras Museum in the Ninth Ward?
Lewis, yeah.
Lewis.
Yeah, I kind of found that out, not directly. I was reading something and there it was, and I hadn't heard about that. I met that man probably around 2010 or 2011, 2012, whenever I was able to get into the Ninth Ward. And yeah, I couldn't believe that he passed away.
Kalamu, before you came on, I was talking about how much I really enjoyed and was edified by the stuff about Black aesthetics and the debates going on within Free Southern Theater about what the kind of proper role to play, and I just thought that was really interesting. But the other thing that I think goes along with what Megan, you were talking about before, about how timely it is the piece about Mardi Gras in 1968 and the Zulu. And I think, and his role at Jazz Fest, and I mean, I think there are a lot of ways in which, if you were to do a kind of genealogy of ideas, of what's present in Jazz Fest now, a lot of those ideas would go straight back to him. Because I see them in this seems like a lot of Jazz Festy kind of concept, analysis underneath. Is that anywhere near true, Kalamu?
It is, very much so. The book represents only a small portion, a minute, you might even say, portion of Tom's writing. We had to make choices and selections and what have you. But not just the writings, we're talking about life. And you touch on some things that you probably are not fully aware of, and most people have not even heard of. Tom was on the board of directors of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. When I returned to the city from the Army in 1968. In 1969, we had the major demonstration out at Southern University, New Orleans. We took down the flag and raised the flag of Black liberation. And, it was a major takeover. We took over the school. We ran the school until the summer, when they closed the school, and they expelled 3,000 students over the summer to make sure that when they reopened, they would regain control, because up until that time, we ran everything. But Tom was not a student at that time. Tom was not officially on staff at SUNO or anything else like that. But Tom and I would talk about this, and part of it was that Tom's background prepared him to understand education, and at the same time prepared him to be anti-establishment. And part of Tom's background is, and I will never forget this, he's talking to me, and he talks about the time when he would play football, tossing the football back and forth with, of all people, Paul Robeson. Because Robeson would come down and visit at Dillard University. And Tom, as a youngster, they would play football. And Tom said it, when he first said it to me, he said it in passing. But then I began to realize, when you look at some of the things, Matt, that you were mentioning, and the aesthetics, that it goes back that far. And in fact, I can remember one Mardi Gras, Paul Robeson's son, who had been living in Russia for a while, visited Tom, and we watched parades on Canal Street and went out and so forth and so on. The point I'm making is that Tom's history goes way, way back, a long way, much farther than Tom Dent the Writer. Goes way back, and he builds on that history. So he was on the board of directors. When I got involved with what was it? I forget the name of the group we had, but it was the Jazz Fest Coalition, a group of active Black activists who were vehemently opposed to Jazz Fest. And to his credit, George Wein was the one who understood that they had to make changes at Jazz Fest. They had tried to do the first jazz festival under Skiro, was not the Jazz Fest as we know it today, but it was another organization, and that didn't work. And so then George Wein was invited. And when George Wein came here the first time, he rejected working with the people here. Why? Because George Wein was married to a Black woman, Joyce. And when he came here, they would not have allowed his wife to stay at the hotel with him. I mean, people don't know about all of this part of the history, but it's important to point that out, because that's when how this lineage goes. So George Wein was not part of the first jazz festival. Then when George Wein came down again for a second time after that first effort failed, they tried to talk to him. And we must remember that George Wein was head of the Newport Jazz Festival, which was the not only preeminent, but the dominant force in terms of jazz music and any kind of festival you want to have about jazz. So George came down the second time, and it was then that he agreed to do the festival as we know it today, and the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation was founded. But at that time, Tom knew George. So when I came along, Tom had been on the board of directors. Some years passed, and I'm skipping to go fast. Some years passed, and we'd had demonstrations, all kinds of things had happened. But I was working as an editor at the Black Collegian magazine. And I got a call one day and was asked, would I be interested in working as the director, executive director of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. I talked with some of my friends, family, and comrades, and I agreed to do it. One of the people whom I was close to and asked about this whole offer was Tom, because I wasn't going to make a move in a cultural sense without having, taking counsel from Tom. And Tom suggested that, yes, I should do it. And by then Tom had resigned from the Jazz and Heritage Board. He was working on some other projects. So I became executive director. When I decided to leave the executive directorship, one of the things I attempted to do and was successful at it, not me alone, but along with a number of other people, was to get Tom Dent to become the executive director of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. Tom actually followed me as the executive director of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. And Tom started the lecture series that is still going on today in his name. So Tom and I were sort of intertwined when it comes to the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage. And there's a whole history there that is just not well known, that ought to be better known. And I'm just not interested in writing that. I'm working on some other projects, but somebody ought to write a real history of the Jazz Fest.
Ask a question. Anne, you're on mute.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was wondering if it would be possible for perhaps you, sir, to read something from Tom Dent. I'm really fascinated by his words and his language. I'm thinking about introspection number 2. In the new edition, it's on page 254. The reason that I'm asking is because while I value so much the interpretation, it's, as you're saying, the spoken word, especially for poetry, is the way it lives rather than just interpretation. Would you be able to do that, sir?
Introspection number 2.
Yes.
I have to see which one it is. Let me.
Sunday afternoons, the lakefront, that one.
Yeah. Hold on a second.
Okay. And I could only give you the page number on my new edition. And thank you, Megan, and thank you for reaching out in so many different ways. My book arrived in the mail like a day or 2 ago.
Is that on 296? Introspection number 2 for Bobby? Is that the one?
Yeah, mine has it on 264. If you have a different edition, perhaps it's on a different page.
Yeah, I have it. Yeah, I might. Here's something to a little footnote. Bobby is referring to Tom's wife. He was married. They were married to, I guess, about 6 or 7 years. And the last time I was in New York, she was still with us. So that's who Bobby is. Introspection number 2. Sunday afternoons, the lakefront is peaceful, like someone blessed it. Possibly some secret God blessed not just the sheet of sun warmth or the breezing trees or the blue of that tranquil, treacherous lake with all its undertricks. It is a place graced by Pharaoh's insistent and groaning sounds. Pharaoh here refers to Pharaoh Sanders, saxophonist associated with John Coltrane at that time. Pharaoh's insistent and groaning sounds of organized sunlight, recording like waves the beauties of all movement, all movement, all meditations. All this comes after knowing the destruction of cities, of bits of glass flying through space, of legs and eyes flying alone through steel, implanted in steel, buried in steel, steel of dress suits taking over, giving command, orders of funerals, piled on top of funerals, beyond all memory, including ours, of 100-year hopes taking power dives into the sand. And now, peaceful. So sudden, so unexpected. This peace, is it real? Like someone blessed this place in time and space. Someone blessed this place in time and space. In time, someone blessed in time and space. It is real, for the magic clothes our people. Like a great God had rode in from the lake and said, peace. Peace unto you, my people. Be beautiful. And flashed all the beauty colors of nature just for the hell of it. And it, for once, worked. Could we float, melt into this? Could we? Could we float? Could we melt? Could we float, melt? Could we float and melt into this? I mean, we need no other thing. We need no other thing than to melt, to be a part of this, to be one with these people here in this time and place. Sun in Aquarius, in Aquarius, in Aquarius, us, sun in Aquarius, in Aquarius, in Aquarius, us. Sun in Aquarius refers to back to Pharoah Sanders' composition he was doing at the time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Welcome.
for that.
So
Yeah.
what is the bits of glass flying through space? When was this written?
Oh, when was this written? This had to be early 80s.
What was the reference there in that part, in that section?
I don't know. I don't know which specific bits of glass he was referring to.
It almost sounds like 9/11 at this point.
Well, Tom worked for time period in the Desire Housing Project. And during the 70s, there were rebellions all over the place. And New Orleans never had a major uprising, but in Desire, there was a major shootout around the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
And we were close to many of the people involved in that.
Dress suits changing over. That sounds like a white-black thing.
Yeah, and the Free Southern Theater, we were located on Laussette and Louisa. And the Desire Project was located 2 blocks away. Then you got the canal, you cross the canal and you're in the Desire Project. And so Tom had doing work in the Desire Project and was really, he was conversant with that whole area. And we all, because I was from the 9th Ward, I was from the lower 9, but I was from the 9th Ward. And so we were comfortable in the 9th Ward. And the Free Southern, that's where the Free Southern Theater building was located at the time. And so that whole, the glass thing, there were disturbances, let's put it that way. We can't say full-fledged as they would in other places, riots or anything like that, because that's not the way New Orleans was organized. But there were disturbances, and one of the locations for the major disturbances was the Desire area. And in fact, they brought a tank in. They had to bring a tank in to quell the disturbances there.
Can you Zoom with me every night and read poetry? Because look what you did.
Oh.
Totally read him to sleep.
Is that the first grader?
No, this is the 4-year-old.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, your voice. I don't know what you did, but you got it. Yeah.
Woke me up.
Do you have a poem that is a favorite of yours, sir?
Do I have a poem of Tom's work that's big?
Yeah, one that you really enjoy reading. Your voice added so much to what I had read, and you just responded so generously and did that one. But perhaps there is a poem that really speaks to you, that you feel the emotion comes through particularly well as the speaker of the poetry.
The one I often read of Tom's work, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a favorite, but it's one of the ones I read publicly a lot, is For Lewis. And the Lewis in this case, hold on, this is not the one. There's two. I forget.
Little Lewis?
Yeah, for
Little Lewis?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Where's the
I
Lewis?
just saw that one.
Let me find it. City Sketches, Untitled, Mississippi, Alabama, Introspection, Magnolia Street, Cool Papa. Yeah, for Lil Lewis.
What page?
It's just 302 in the reader.
Oh.
Huh?
It's a different page in my book.
Oh, okay. What page you
I
have?
don't know. I'm looking. Go ahead.
It's one of the last poems in the poetry section.
Mm-hmm. I have it marked.
It is the last poem in the poetry section.
That's Armstrong.
Hmm?
Armstrong, right?
Yeah, Louis Armstrong. And got it?
Yep.
Matt? All right.
Yep. Thank you.
For Lil Lewis.
270.
Huh?
270.
Oh, 270, okay. For Lil Lewis. Lewis, I'm trying to understand what you are here and how you left this place, how you gave the people bravura music, how you could survive it all, even Bucket of Blood, where the frustration of our people borrowed into daily laughter. But then New Old is an old town for that. As I'm reading this, there's so many references in here that I don't think would even be known. But I'll just stop and give you two right quick. Bucket of Blood was a name of a joint that, or was a reference to a joint in uptown New Orleans. And New Old is what we used to call, it was our shorthand for New Orleans, because the O was also an infinity sign for us and how long this culture had been going on. So we refer to New Orleans as New Old. Don't you think it's a moon town? I should just read the poem, but I got to make this reference. Moon has to do with the Romantic language word for moon, which is Luna. And that's the word that gave us lunatics. which meant that the moon influenced you to do crazy things. And so all of that is quote unquote that's the last one. I'm just going to read the whole thing, but there's so many of these references in here. Don't you think it's a moon town where the imagination of violence sparks easily to life? Don't you think? It's a moon town where imagination, where imagination and violence sparks easily to life. What festers in the minds of the grandchildren of the people who knew, who languish now in the projects? Bucket of Blood was demolished. The people banished to the project. Your old town, the city's new progress. Your old house, the city's new jailhouse. Such the way it is, the city tells you what they think of you. Your old town, the city's new progress. Your old house, the city's new jailhouse. The way it is, the city tells you what they think of you. The way the city tells you what they think of you and everyone like you. The city tells you and everyone like you what they think of you. And still the people dance and progress looks on afraid. Lewis, I'm trying to understand what you were really like in the dark moments away from the stage. Lewis, what you were really like. Dark moments away from the stage. Rumors have it you were not pleasant to be around. The shit-eating grin nowhere to be found. Did the moon blood intrude the sleep of your nights? Even sleep of your days? Did you carry moon blood memories to the grave? Lewis, I'm trying to understand, but never mind. It's enough that you said, don't bury me in New Orleans. It's enough. You said, don't bury me in New Orleans. Don't bury me in and it's enough. Don't bury me. It's enough to hear your trumpet. Don't bury me in New Orleans, laughing at it all. Your trumpet, laughing at it all. It's enough that you played the truth, the truth, the truth. And the sweaty handkerchief, always honest, honest. It's enough. It's enough. But Lewis, loudest, Lewis, loudest, loudest, Lewis, someday the dancers will explode and all this little history will shatter as all the shit-eating masks fall, and only the moon will know. And only the moon, Lewis, only the moon will know. I'm through.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah. There's so many, yeah, there are so many references in that in Tom's poetry. Some of it on a personal level, but a lot of it cultural, you know. And I don't, I don't know if everybody, well, I know that everybody can't know all of those things, but it's interesting how he talks about all of that. And Louis Armstrong left New Orleans, went to New York as his final living place. And when he was in New York and had bought a house, and he wanted to make sure that people understood, he did not want to be brought back to New Orleans when he died. Don't bury me in New Orleans. That's a literal quote from Louis Armstrong.
He seems to be, he's listening. He's not just, these are the things that people are talking about, don't you think?
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's even deeper than that, because Louis Armstrong bought a portable typewriter, and as he traveled the world, he would type letters and send them to friends. Louis Armstrong was a writer, as were many other New Orleans musicians, partly because of the heritage here. Black people in New Orleans were literate long before Black people in many other parts of the United States, and especially the South.
I remember seeing not too long ago, maybe a year ago, they did the whole thing about those collages he used to create.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God, so dense. It was like Talmudic, stuff.
Yeah, Louis Armstrong was deeper than most of us, really know.
Yeah.
Like that, the reference to Bucket of Blood being a joint, that reference is to where Louis Armstrong grew up, because he grew up in was called at the time Jane Alley, but it's located now where the jail is. And that's why Tom was saying his old town was the jail, is now the jailhouse. He's referring specifically to that element. Again, I think it's probably lost to a lot of people what Tom was talking about. But if you know where Louis Armstrong grew up, and the fact that the area he grew up in was torn down, and that's now where the jailhouse is.
I never realized that.
Yeah. Tom was deep. That's all I can say. He was deep.
And also the whole kind of Prince of the City part of it. He had this consciousness that was always moving between groups. I thought that whole piece, in the New York aspect of it, and the going and the coming back. I mean, so when you hear that story, is so many New Orleanians that he's telling. So he's telling that story for so many people, I think.
Yeah. That, in fact, in the history of the music is such that in the 20s and 30s, many of those musicians traveled and made a name elsewhere, but would sometimes come back. And the most the most influential in terms of modern New Orleans music is Danny Barker. He had gone to New York, and then came back here in the late 50s. And Danny was important for a number of reasons, but Tom introduced me to Danny, and I became close to Danny, not as close as Tom was, but we would often go over to Danny's house on Sears Street and sit sit and drink and talk. And Danny had a back room where he had, I remember he brought me back in the back room one time, and he was showing me different things he had. And he had these shoes on a shelf. And I kind of instinctively knew it meant something. I didn't know what it meant. I said, Danny, whose shoes that is? They look like that's too big for your feet. And Danny laughed. You have to know Danny to understand that his laugh would be a little slight chuckle, and he'd just grin at you and then nod his head. He said, well, that's Bojangles' shoes. And so he had Bojangles' shoes sitting there. He had, I mean, there was so many different things he had, you know. Danny Barker. Well, Danny was the person who organized the Fairview Baptist Church Band. And in the Fairview are a lot of the young musicians. And coming out of the Fairview, you have people like Dr. Michael White, the trumpeter Leroy Jones, and
Hurlin.
Hurlin Raleigh was a drummer, but Hurlin started as a trumpeter. And you also had virtually the early formation that became the Dirty Dozen Brass Band. All came.
Is that Shannon Powell also?
Yeah, Shannon was came through there.
Mm-hmm.
Ephraim, Blody, and so many others. But the point I'm making is that in terms of genealogy, Danny preceded Tom. Tom got close to Danny and then introduced me to Danny. And so that a lot of the stuff you hear from my lips are the part of the consciousness that came from Danny Barker and certainly from Tom Dent. And we just passed that whole element of the griot element, basically, in which you have these people who sang the history. And if you got to really know them, then you would learn the history and not just the songs. And so that's when we refer to New Orleans Griot. Tom is one of the griots in the lineage that goes back a long ways. And Danny Barker was the living embodiment of that lineage in the modern era here in New Orleans, long after Jelly Roll and and Lewis was gone and so forth and so on. But Danny was here, and then Tom, and now me. I'm carrying on so that's all. We're just part of a long griot lineage, just carrying it on. That's all.
Well, we appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Anybody have any other questions, comments? Want to say
personal. I was curious about him reading the whole book. He always, you said he was married for a few years, but
yeah.
He seemed to be, wandering, W-A-N-D, just sitting around doing his griot thing. Did he not have lots of other intimate relationships other than, his friends?
There were people, yes. There were people. There were some people in New York. Couple of people, well, a number of people throughout the South. Well, one of the more important ones was John Buffington. And there's a section in the book. I think there's a poem about John Buffington.
I think maybe, yeah. Okay, I'll look at that again.
Yeah.
And how old was he when he passed away?
I don't remember.
50s? Was he in his 50s?
When Tom passed away?
Correct. Yes.
No, he was older than 50.
He was. Okay.
Does anybody have that information off the top? I don't remember.
I didn't do the math. Was he born in 42? Why do I think he was born in 42?
Off the top, I feel like he was like 68 or something like that when he passed.
It's about right. Somewhere.
Not off by more than 2 years, probably.
Okay.
Because I remember he was really young.
Yeah.
Well, I can do it this way. I can click here.
Ah.
Bear with me a second, and I'll tell you the answer. I'm online.
I could ask Alexis.
Tom Dent, born. They give me the birth date. They don't give me the death date.
32.
32.
March
Okay.
20, 1932.
Okay.
Died June 6, 1998.
Okay. Yeah, so he was 60 some odd. Okay. Well, it's still too young.
He was, this doesn't have the death date.
It was right though, it was 98. I'm reading that somewhere.
Yeah.
So he was 66.
66. Yeah, that's young.
Hold on, I think he was older than 66. Give me a second. I don't know why he's.
32 to 98.
So Kalamu, while you're looking for that, if you had a favorite memory of Tom Dent, what would it be?
I don't have a favorite memory per se. I think I could tell you one of the very influential elements. Tom and I used to get together, and I believe it was Tuesday nights. The Dirty Dozen used to play at a club uptown on Saratoga and near Second, I guess, Saratoga, called the Glass House. And we would go there to just to dig the scene. And there's another aspect of Tom, now that you bring that to mind. He was the person that opened me up to understanding the importance of international connections. So Kamal Brathwaite, whom I just wrote a piece about, whom I considered the greatest poet in the Western Hemisphere, died recently. Tom introduced me to Kamal, and Kamal and I became very close. There was a sculptor and painter from Ethiopia, Skunda. Tom introduced South African writer, Karapetsi. We call him Willie. Was a good friend. He passed not too long ago. And some of the people in New York, Tom would introduce me to from time to time. When we would go about. And so Tom was, I can remember going over to his house one time, and we were talking about something. I asked him a question about something, and Tom said, go to the bookshelf and check out this writer. And it was an Ugandan writer. And so what Tom did for me was make sure that we focused on New Orleans and New Orleans culture and really got to know New Orleans, but also to be involved in the world literature and what have you. And so it was kind of a dual thing. And I never thought about it too much because that was just part of what we did. You do that. But I realize now that most people do not grow up in both worlds. There was a Chico Hamilton, who was a jazz drummer, who did a very famous album of the time period called Man from Two Worlds. And if I remember correctly, Charles Lloyd, the saxophonist, was on that album. And Charles Lloyd and I later became good friends. And anyway, Tom was that kind of person. So my memory of Tom is that he would hook me up with all kinds of things that I otherwise would not probably have gotten so deeply into. And when I was going through Tom's papers, one of the things I came across, and I don't remember if the letter was to Tom or was a letter that Tom had acquired, but it was a Langston Hughes letter. And it revealed to me that Langston Hughes spent a summer in New Orleans, which I never knew about. And, you know, Langston, of course, as I said earlier, was my patron saint. So I was just bowled over by that. But Tom knew Langston. And Tom was the one, that was part of his job. And I try and pass that on to people I've worked with. So you got to be grounded, but you also have to be, you got to be grounded in your home, but interested in the world. And Tom did that for me. And I find that a lot of people are not, they're usually one or the other, but they're not both. And Tom was the one that really, yeah, he said that. And he lived it. And that's why part of my memories of James Baldwin are always being at Tom's house. Because James would come sometimes and stay with Tom. James Baldwin would come down and we'd talk and all kinds of stuff, you know. Again, that's not even part of the quote unquote recorded history, but that's who Tom Dent was.
Kalamu?
Yes.
While you're talking about Tom and the influence that he had on you, could you talk about the influence that he had on you and NOMO, the literary group that you conducted years of local New Orleans writers?
Well, Freddie, you're being much too modest in saying on me, because indirectly, Tom had a major impact on you.
Yes.
Without because Tom started the first workshop we had, which I joined, the Free Southern Theater. Then when we did out in Free Southern Theater, but separate from Free Southern Theater, we did Black Art South. And Tom and I were co-directors of that. And Tom taught me to value and pass on to others and organize others to get into the culture. So this was after Tom had passed, when I did the last workshop I did. Freddie, you were not only in it, but you were the first writer, as you will remember when I mentioned this. In fact, I think I see it now that you understand it. When Freddie joined the group, she was one of the elder members of the group, not as old as I was, but but one of the elder members. And at one point, Freddie didn't think that she fit in with a lot of the youngsters who were doing this, that, and the other. And I can remember we were on Brainerd Street, uptown off of Jackson Avenue, sitting on the swing. And I told Freddie, I said, you're going to be the first one to have a book. And sure enough, that is what happened. And Freddie has become, and so that, when I spoke of that Griot lineage, Freddie is in that long line. She's next. After I'm gone, she's going to be one of the ones that y'all talk about and everything. She's written these books. She's delved into the culture. She has done that work. And until these dots are connected, people are not going to know from whence it came. But you Tom Dent, you know.
Yes, and he attended some of the workshops.
Yes, right.
So Freddie, my older boy, is just now old enough to really get into the young readers' Congo Square history, and he's loving it. So thank you for that.
Thank Kalamu too. Yes, all of us, the group, NOMO.
Yeah.
And left.
And that was Tom. Tom was the one that I mean, he never directly said, you start a workshop, but learning from him, I said, this is what's got to do. This is how you carry it on. You don't carry it on to your individual, just your individual work. You have to work with others.
Yes.
You know. Any other comments, questions? Sound like class people fell asleep, so I'm going to be time to go.
It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and for Megan for putting it together, and for the in-depth lecture.
Well, thank you to NOLALit, because these guys actually picked this book for April long before this pandemic. So we were originally all going to meet at Columns, and then it turned into this. So thank you guys for choosing this book at what turned out to be a really timely time for us all to need to get together with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for organizing and getting Kalamu over here to talk with us, and everyone for coming tonight. And it's been really great to have everyone together.
So NOLALit, what's your next book?
No, what is it?
I guess we're coming.
We did a poll, didn't we? For Beneath the Sea, I believe won the poll. The Isabel Allende.
Okay, yeah.
I believe. I need to check on that.
Collection, but I'll check it out.
Isabel Allende, we were in, I want to say Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm pretty sure it was Salt Lake City. And I was on a program with her and got a chance to talk with her a bit. But her namesake, who was the leader in, where was it, Chile? Yeah, I think Allende was from Chile, who was assassinated.
The dictator, yeah. That's the Peruvian dictator.
Is it?
No, not the Peruvian dictator. This was, what was? I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
Pinochet, or am I totally wrong?
No, not Pinochet. Allende. Let's see.
You're right. He was the Chilean dictator.
But see, why do we call him Chilean dictator?
It was Salvador.
Yes,
Allende.
Salvador Allende.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Someone said dictator.
Yeah, but he was elected. He was a socialist, and he was
Right.
elected. And when he was elected, the U.S. government went ballistic, and the CIA, and they poured money in it, and they eventually led to a coup, and they assassinated him. he was assassinated. And I remember talking with Isabel Allende about that. Because her work, yeah, she was a Chilean writer. Her work is just extremely important. And I'd written a piece about that whole thing. It was, oh, what's the title of that piece? Anyway, that's another story for another time. But she was very important. And she's a writer who, she consciously wrote about New Orleans in one of her books.
He was her uncle, I think, Salvador.
Yes, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But she consciously wrote about New Orleans in one of her books.
Yeah, that's the one we're going to read, the Island Under the
Under the sea.
Sun. Is that right? Island of the Sun. And yeah, it starts out in the Caribbean and then they come to New Orleans.
Right.
Yeah. And it's, well, we're looking forward to it. So if any of you guys want to join us, that'll be next month. It's probably going to be Zoom again, unfortunately. I think the columns looks pretty boarded up right now, so we'll probably be online again.
Yeah, we're going to be online next month. This virus issue is not going to be settled within a month.
No.
Elizabeth, you look like you're in the Serengeti. What kind of
okay, so everyone, yeah, I am. I'm in this Serengeti, yeah.
That's what it looks like to me.
This is from a few years ago. We went to Tanzania, and so that's the background. I picked. I don't have that many landscapes on my laptop here, so I thought the Serengeti would work for everyone.
Where were you? Where were you in Tanzania? Where in Tanzania?
Where was I?
Yeah.
So we were near Serengeti National Park in just like a little sort of a concession on the edge of it. So we drove into the park and, you know, did like photo safari and rode around in the Jeep, saw the animals. It's really amazing. It's beautiful, and
did you get
the animals are amazing. What's that?
Did you get up to Arusha? Arusha, Tanzania. Did you get there? Yeah. No.
Yeah, but not for very long. For like one day we were over there. Yeah.
And did you go to Zanzibar?
We did go to Zanzibar. Zanzibar wasn't what we expected. We got there and they were having a cholera epidemic, which nobody mentioned until we were there. So I guess it was a little precursor for coronavirus. We got a little practice in
it was just in
Zanzibar.
Was it a pandemic? It was silly little.
It was just a little localized, just a little minor problem. But we went on this tour. And the tour guide kept telling us like, oh, well, normally we would take you over here, but it's closed due to the cholera. And we were like, what?
How did that happen?
Yeah, so so it all turned and then we were afraid to go out to eat anywhere because we weren't sure, you know, like where was safe. And yeah, it all, you know, and when you travel, you know, you tend to have, you know, a lot of, your stomach can be a little jittery anyway. So we all just kind of like, it just became a big joke. Like, if we had cholera, how would we know? Because, you know,
right.
We're all having these problems anyway. But yeah, Tanzania, it was, sorry, Zanzibar, it's very beautiful if it's not for the cholera. That part was, we were only there for a couple nights, but I've been back to Tanzania a couple times. So once you go on safari, you just want to go again. So
yeah.
yeah.
I was in Tanzania in '74. Went over to Zanzibar and Zanzibar, land of the blacks. It was one of the most beautiful experiences, seeing the Indian Ocean and the gradations of the water colors, the green going to blue.
It's beautiful.
It's incredible. It's difficult to describe. It was that beautiful. It was just,
Yeah, absolutely.
Zanzibar. And it's so different from Tanzania mainland. So you took the ferry over, or how did you get over?
They actually flew us over in a little airplane.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then we flew back, and then that was at the end of our trip. So not everyone who'd been on the safari went. We kind of split up. Some people flew back to wherever they were, came from, and the rest of us went on. And then we took the little plane back, and then we finally came home. But it was an amazing trip. We went. It was actually organized by the Audubon Zoo a few years ago. That was the second time I'd gone, but the zoo trip was really great. They're trying to put on, trips to different places, but they had gotten us some really fantastic naturalists, tour guides to tell us about the Serengeti, and there were one or two people who worked at the zoo came along with us. So, that was all just really, really great experience. And we spent most of our time out, in the and see the kids at school, and just kind of talk to them about their day and what they usually do, and they're all just really they're so eager for knowledge, the kids. So it's really inspiring to see them.
You're one of the few people that I can talk to about Zanzibar. Zanzibar, because most people have never been there, just never have never been there. And I was blessed, again, part of the political work I did. I was a delegate to the 6th Pan-African Congress, and that's how I got to Tanzania. And while I was in Tanzania, there was an invitation to a few of us to go over to Zanzibar. And in Zanzibar, that's where I learned about the Chinese presence in Africa. People think that it's recent. This goes way back, that the government under Zhou Enlai as the premier made sure, much more so than Mao, made sure that there were connections. And in Zanzibar, when I was there in '74, the Chinese were there, and they were operating a cigarette factory and a number of other places, and we got a chance to meet them. The world, most of us in the United States.
I don't remember seeing.
You wouldn't have seen them.
I realize they're in Africa.
Right, yeah, you wouldn't have seen them. You wouldn't have seen them because outside, they didn't they didn't roam around the countryside. They were workers in specific plants, and they had their own dormitory space. And you went there, you worked, you went to your dorm, and you went back to work. That's all you did. They didn't go around. Well, what I'm saying is that we in the United States are just not aware of the world. So Allende and Zanzibar and all that, we think of these as places that are exotic or so forth and so on. We don't understand that there's a whole world out there where people are relating to each other and attempting, and unfortunately, we are not aware of a lot of this. And it was only partially because of Tom Dent that I became aware of a lot of these things. And so even some of the experiences I had previously before I met Tom, I would not fully understand were it not for Tom giving me a grounding and introducing me to people and concepts and ideas and teaching me about different things. So that by the time I was in Germany twice, but by the time I'd gotten there, Tom had introduced me to the works of Primo Levi, who was Italian and had a major writer. And these kinds of things, I would not have known about it. Milan Kundera, the Czech, I believe he was Czechoslovakian writer. But all of these things, Tom Dent is so important in that regard. And I try and pass that on to people I've worked with. And then they end up outshining the sun. People like Freddie, who has written extensively about Congo Square. And that's not, all I'm saying is it's not an accident, and it's very much in keeping with the organizing this around the Tom Dent book, because Tom taught me and I was just passing it on to others. And that's how we're here today.
All right, well, thank you, and we'll try to have some more events this year around the book, right? So
Yeah,
figure out what we can do. Hopefully, we'll be released out of our homes maybe in the fall.
So Elizabeth, Kalamu is actually going to be one of our readers. There's this dream event happening virtually on the 25th. It's 16 years of one book, and it's Kalamu and 8 other authors whose books have been picked, reading from their works and discussing sort of their time with one book and, you know, what their favorite memories of the organization are and all that good stuff. So that'll be on the 25th at noon. There's information about it on our Facebook page, and Kalamu, as the current author of the book, will be one of the readers. So you can check him out again.
All right, great. All right, well.
And I want to end with this small quote from Tom, which is in the book. And it says, "You simply cannot just begin writing. You don't know what you're writing about. You're writing about yourself, and that is important. But you have to know how that relates to what has been written, what we've done, from Frederick Douglass through Ellison," referring to Ralph Ellison. "You may not like it, you may not agree with it, but you've got to know it exists. Then you can begin to progress." You've got to know the past exists in a conscious sense, and not just, oh yeah, that was something that was in a history book. You've really got to know it exists, and then you can really begin writing.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Words to live by. All right, well, we'll see you on the 25th.
Okay, I'll be here.
Thanks, everybody, again. And,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you guys have a good evening.
Thank you. Same to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Try and get my right arm out from under this child.
Good luck with that.
Ow, look at that. He is gone, man. We need to have book club every night. He never goes to sleep this easily.
All right.
Thank you guys so much for being
All right.
here. Good night.
Much
Good night.
love.
Peace.
Good night.